At 25,000 feet above Nazi Germany, the sky was brutally quiet. The sun hung cold and distant, and every breath Jack Reynolds took through his oxygen mask burned with frost. His fingers were numb around the control stick. Behind him, a twin-engine Messerschmitt Bf-110 closed in fast, its heavy frame gaining just enough speed to threaten. Jack yanked the stick back and climbed higher, thinner, deadlier. Most American fighters would have coughed, sputtered, and stalled at this altitude. The air was too thin, the engines overheated, but not this time. Jack's P-51 Mustang surged forward like it had just woken up. The Merlin engine purred instead of strained, pushing past 25,000 feet without a hitch. The German pilot tried to follow. He pulled up after Jack. His aircraft wobbled, stuttered, then slipped out of the climb and fell away into the blue. Jack let out a half-laugh, half-breath, his heart pounding. This wasn't standard. This Mustang didn't fly like the others. What Jack didn't know was that this edge, this advantage had started far below, not in a factory, not in an office, but in a freezing hangar in East Anglia, England, where one American mechanic had made a decision that went against orders, broke every regulation, and may have saved Jack's life. This is the true story of how one man's unapproved fix transformed the most important fighter of World War II, and how a single act of rebellion helped America win the skies over Europe. Back in 1942, American military leadership was selling a dream. The P-51 Mustang wasn't just another fighter, it was the future. Sleek, fast, long-ranged, and married to the power of the British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. Official reports called it flawless. Training manuals praised its engineering. It was supposedly everything the American pilot needed to dominate the skies. But down on the ground, inside the muddy, wind-blasted airfields of East Anglia, England, perfection was nowhere to be found. The Mustang looked good on paper. It flew well in warm weather at low altitude. But in real combat, at 20,000 feet in air, in sub-zero air, under full throttle pressure, pilots and mechanics started to notice the truth. The aircraft had a hidden weakness. The cooling system became a serious liability. The belly-mounted scoop under the fuselage was supposed to pull in high-pressure air to cool the radiator, but in practice, that system was finicky. Pilots began reporting engine overheating during climbs. In the middle of dogfights, their gauges would spike red, warning them to throttle back or risk burning out entirely. In winter, the coolant sometimes froze before the engine could even warm up. The official position from command was simple. Do not modify the aircraft. Do not question the design. Follow procedure. That answer didn't sit right with a 33-year-old staff sergeant from Tulsa, Oklahoma, named Melvin Harper. Everyone on base called him Tex. He was a lanky, soft-spoken mechanic with hands like steel vices and a mind that never stopped tinkering. Before the war, he'd spend his weekends tuning flathead Fords and drag racing friends on old farm roads. He didn't care much for rules, but he knew machinery intimately. Over time, something started to bother Tex. It was the sound, that hollow metallic groan the engine made when climbing fast at high altitude. Then came the complaints. Engine temps too high, coolant systems needing constant repairs. More than one Mustang came back scorched under the cowling or didn't come back at all. One night in December, after yet another overheated P-51 limped back from patrol, Tex crouched under the fuselage with a flashlight, staring at the belly scoop. He started asking questions no one else dared to ask. What if the scoop's angle was wrong? What if the airflow didn't compress the way the designers thought it would? Officially, he was supposed to log the issue and wait for engineering updates from stateside. But Tex had lost 2 friends that week. He wasn't about to wait.
So he made a decision. The next morning, armed with scrap aluminum, a welding torch, and a mechanic's instinct sharpened by years of racing engines under pressure, Tex Harper broke the rules. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't file a report. He just got to work. Tex started by removing the lower access panel beneath the belly scoop on one P-51. Inside was the radiator duct, meant to channel outside airflow through the radiator and out the rear. It looked fine on the surface, but techs believed the internal shape was wrong for actual high-speed, high-altitude flight. In theory, if the airflow was compressed properly, it wouldn't just cool the engine, it could generate a small amount of jet-like thrust. That was the Meredith effect, something engineers at Rolls-Royce had theorized about but never fully implemented. Tex hadn't read any white papers. He didn't need to. He understood how airflow behaved at speed. What he saw inside that scoop made him shake his head. Sharp corners, misaligned joints, and no smoothing to guide high-pressure air where it needed to go. The duct acted more like a brake than a boost. Using thin sheets of polished aluminum from a damaged wing panel, he cut and shaped a series of internal vanes, angled plates that gently narrowed the airflow passage, forcing the incoming air to compress before it reached the radiator. He smoothed the edges, riveted them in place, and added a makeshift seal to reduce turbulence. He didn't tell his commanding officer. He didn't log the modification. He didn't even mention it to Lieutenant Jack Reynolds, the pilot scheduled to fly the aircraft the next morning. 30 minutes into his high-altitude patrol, Jack radioed back with a strange report. Birds climbing smoother than ever, temps holding steady. Is this a new engine? Tex didn't answer. He just smiled. By the end of that first flight, the results were obvious. Engine temperature at 25,000 feet, down by 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Acceleration and climb, noticeably improved. Jack said the plane felt tighter, more alive. Tex didn't stop there. Over the next 2 weeks, he applied his mod to 6 more Mustangs. Each one got a custom-fitted duct system, tweaked slightly based on what he learned from the last. The impact was undeniable. Planes that received the Tex mod climbed faster, stayed cooler, and returned from missions with fewer mechanical issues. Pilots began requesting the hot ones, Texas planes. They started calling the tweaks Harper's hacks. Unofficially, the squadron commander gave him the green light. Officially, nothing had happened. Other maintenance crews noticed. Mechanics began sneaking into his hangar at night to measure duct angles and sketch the design on cigarette packs. The mod spread like wildfire, and no one dared report it. The pilots had a simple motto: anything that brought them home alive was worth keeping quiet. By spring of 1944, Tex Harper's once secret duct modification was an open secret across East Anglia. But that kind of success doesn't stay in the shadows for long. When a visiting colonel from the 8th Air Force Command spotted the unauthorized ductwork during an inspection, his face turned red. Within minutes, he was demanding answers. Who authorized this modification? Where were the engineering documents? Tex was called in. He didn't lie. He explained simply and clearly what he had changed and why. He showed temperature logs, climb rate comparisons, and combat reports. Other mechanics backed him up. Pilots lined up to speak on his behalf. Captain Red Lansing stood in front of the colonel and delivered one sentence that cut through the noise. "Sir, you can fly it cold or die hot. That's the choice." The colonel made a call that evening. 2 days later, engineers from North American Aviation arrived on base, carrying blueprints, testing equipment, and a list of questions. They spent a week examining Tex's modifications, running airflow tests and installing pressure sensors. When the data came back, the verdict was clear. Tex Harper's design didn't just work, it was brilliant. The internal vanes helped stabilize airflow, reduce turbulence, and increase pressure across the radiator core. That improved heat dissipation and allowed the Meredith effect to kick in under combat conditions, delivering a small but measurable thrust gain.
In short, Tex had done in a freezing hangar what a team of engineers hadn't been able to pull off in 2 years of development. The recommendation came swiftly. North American began reviewing the changes for incorporation into the next production batch of P-51s, the D variant, which would become the most famous model of the war. As for Tex, he wasn't reprimanded. He was promoted to technical sergeant and given a field commendation for innovation under combat conditions. But Tex didn't care about rank. What mattered to him were the pilots. The fact that more of them were coming back now because of something he built with scrap metal and instinct. That was enough. One of them carved it into the access panel of his Mustang with a pocket knife, for Tex, who made her breathe. March 6, 1944. The U.S. 8th Air Force launched its boldest daylight bombing mission yet, Berlin. It was the heart of the Reich, and the Germans were ready to throw everything they had into the sky to stop it. Hundreds of American bombers took off from bases across England. Their protection? Squadrons of P-51 Mustangs, flying high and fast as fighter escort. No test was greater than the airspace above Berlin, the most heavily defended air corridor in Europe. Just west of the German capital, the Luftwaffe struck. German fighters scrambled in waves, hitting the bombers above 25,000 feet, where the cold would test engines and nerves. But this time, the Mustangs didn't fall behind. They didn't lag, didn't overheat, didn't break formation. They stayed up and they hit back. Captain Red Lansing, flying one of Tex's early field-modified Mustangs, reportedly scored 3 kills that day. In debriefing later, he said, "The engine didn't even flinch. I was climbing at 30,000 feet and still had power left. They tried to outclimb me, and they couldn't." By mission's end, 69 German aircraft had been confirmed destroyed, and most stunning of all, nearly every American bomber made it home. The Berlin raid didn't just strike fear into the heart of the Reich. It proved that the U.S. now had air superiority, even over the most defended city in Europe. And while the headlines praised the courage of the pilots, few knew what had really made that mission possible. It wasn't just the Merlin engine, or the fuel tanks, or the combat training. It was airflow. It was cooling. It was the ability to fight at 30,000 feet without your machine turning against you. And for that, the credit went to a man who didn't fly. After the war, Tex Harper went back to Oklahoma and opened a small engine repair shop. Most of his customers never knew he had once shaped the sky over Europe. But his legacy didn't end in 1945. The principles behind his cooling mod became standard practice in post-war aircraft design. Engineers studying jet propulsion borrowed lessons from Tex's battlefield ductwork. The idea that cooling systems could contribute to thrust, not just manage heat, carried forward into the jet age. At the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, there's a restored P-51 Mustang. And if you crouch down beneath the belly, just inside the edge of the radiator scoop, you'll see something most visitors miss. 3 words, etched in small, careful letters, for Tex, who made her breathe. No ceremony, no statue, just a quiet acknowledgement from one generation of warriors to the man who helped them survive. Lieutenant Jack Reynolds, the pilot we met at the beginning of this story, once gave an interview years after the war. When asked who his hero was, he didn't name a general or another pilot. He said this, "People talk about aces, but the man who saved my life wore oil-stained coveralls and never left the ground. I don't even know if I ever saw his face, but I remember how that engine held together when I needed it most. He gave me altitude, and that gave me a chance to come home." Not all heroes fly. Some of them kneel under a Mustang in the dead of night, shaping aluminum with frozen hands, thinking about the pilot who will sit behind that engine tomorrow. And thanks to Tex Harper, that pilot had a better chance of coming home.